So, we spoke a lot about programmers being lazy, or at least it's come up a couple of times. I might have been lazy and not mentioned it, but what we are going to start doing now is we're going to start talking about code reusability. So we've spoken about reusability in terms of loops, for example, and how a loop is I write one piece of code and I apply it to a bunch of different things consecutively. The next thing we're going to be talking about is we're going to talk about functions. Now, there's two kinds of functions. There's functions that already exist, like either that somebody else wrote the code and we just get to use it. We've already done that once a bunch without you noticing. We've done the print function, right? We've been using print a whole lot, and when we spoke about lists, we started talking about length, len, right, which is the length function, and we've used that quite a bit too. Not as much as print, but a little bit. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of built-in functions that Python has, and then in the next lesson we're going to talk about how to create our own functions, what functions actually look like when we're creating them, and how to use the ones that we make and what the purpose of them is, which will lead us right into talking about classes in the one after that. But for now, we are going to be focused on built-in functions. So, creating a new folder, calling this lesson 7, and we're going to create a new file and call it built-in funcs.py. Oops, cancel, that's a mistake, typo. So refactor, rename, and just get rid of the last P, and now it's a .py file. Since I have PyCharm, and since I told PyCharm to automatically add everything to GitHub, to automatically add the files to my Git, this file's in green, so Git knows to start watching it, and eventually it's going to be added when I make my next commit. For now, though, we're going to start talking about the actual built-in commands. So, a function is, the way we access a function is we write the name of the function once the name has been defined, but for example, print has been defined, and then we use circle brackets without a space before them. So it's the word followed by circle brackets, and this is how we say run the function. Now, functions sometimes need information. For example, the print function needs to know what it has to print out. So if I say print this and I give it a string, then it will whoops, even if there's a typo in my string, it will still print out the string, but I don't want a typo in it, so I'm going to save my function, and I'm going to run that file, and it prints out that. This is a function. This is a built-in function, meaning that there's a lot of code that happens behind the scenes, but we don't get to see that, and we don't need to see that. If you hold down the control button and you click on it, it actually opens up, and there's a lot of code here. What the details of this code are, how they relate to other pieces of code. We don't care, we don't worry about, not our business. All we gotta do is we have this nice little line that says print, because someone else who designed Python, or someone in developing Python, created this print function, which is magnificent. There are a lot of other built-in functions, and we are going to just talk about a few of them. The print one prints input. Input is a different Python function, and what input does is it takes in information. Now input also takes in something, also takes a argument. I can also put a string here. What this is you see how PyCharm is really nice. It tells me what the name of the argument is, and the name of the argument is prompt. Which basically means that someone gave whatever string I put gets the variable name prompt. So it's the prompt, it's the thing that gets printed before. That's why giving variables useful names helps, because now when I use this, and I understand that this might not all make sense yet, don't worry about it, but there's a variable called prompt, and I'm giving the value for the variable prompt when I do this. I'm saying enter your name, and then I'm going to do space, and this is a function that actually gets back some information, right? If I run this now, it says, hey, enter your name, and notice how the program doesn't print this yet. I need to actually enter something. So if I enter Muttle and I push enter, then it goes on to the next line, and it runs the next line of the program. But as I'm sure you can imagine, the input function actually gets back a result, right? It gets that information as input, and we can save that to a variable. So if we do name equals, And now when we run the input function, we'll get back some information. That information will be stored in the name function. The same way if I go 2 plus 2 equals 5, the same way if I say x equals 2 plus 2, what does Python do? It says 2 plus 2, so it does an operation. It takes 2, it adds 2 to it, which is doing some function, it's applying some functionality, which in this case is doing some basic math, and then it stores the end result in X. So input is a little bit more of an elaborate function, but it's just doing something and then storing the result of that something back into my variable, which in this case is name. So I'm going to run name, and I'm going to push play, and I'm going to say my name is Muttle, and it's going to print this. That's cool, but I actually want it to print out my name. So we're going to say hello space plus, and then we're going to add the variable name. Now since hello is a string and name is a string, they're going to add the two strings together. Now we want a little space over here, so we're going to do that, and I'm going to click play. And now it says enter name, so I'm going to go Muttle again, and I'm going to push enter, and it prints out hello Muttle. So this is another built-in function. So now I've got the print built-in function and the input built-in function. Two built-in functions that Python offers us. Another one we can do is we can do the length function. So length, we know what this does. It takes in any variable and gives me back the length. How does it know the length of the variable? That's defined when we define the variable type. So for example, numbers have a definition for length. Strings have a definition for length. When we create our own thing, we're also going to create a definition of what the length of our thing means. For example, if you create a car, what's the length of the car? Is it just from bumper to bumper, or is it from ceiling to wheels? What's we got to define that, or is it from top of the door to bottom of the door? We have to define what length is, and so we're going to do that. But for now, we're just going to focus on the built-in length function. So we take the name, and once again, this is going to be some value, right? Length is a function that gives me back a value. It gives me back an integer, which is the length. So I want to print out that value, so I'm just going to say print length name. Going to run this again, and now my name is just going to be, whoops. Always be careful about where you're typing. So my name is going to go over here, and I'm just going to go hello and I printed out 5A, and the length is 5 because I did 5A's. So we've got input, we've got print, we've got length. Those are a couple of basic ones, but the important thing to realize here is not just these are cool tools, and we're going to do one more, and we're going to talk about one more in a moment, but the more important thing to realize about these things is that there's a lot of code that goes behind these tools to work. Right? They all look the same. They all have the same basic syntax, which is the name of something, open and close circle brackets, and they usually require some input, and some of them even give us back some output. Print doesn't really give us back output, but input and length do give us back output. The one other one we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about eval. Eval takes some input and converts it into a number if it can. So we're going to the way you commonly see it used in a lot of basic programs is like this. If I want enter your age, let's say, right? So if I want the user to enter their age, if I want to get back a number as a number, and then I want to be able to act with that as a number, because once it comes back, whatever comes back gets treated as a string by Python. If I want this to be a number instead, I'm going to have to change this to a number. One other cool little trick I'm going to teach you now is if we right-click on a variable name, and I go refactor rename, and I change the name over here, and I say searching comments and strings, which is basically change this everywhere. And we take name, and we're going to change it to age. Refactor. Notice how it automatically changed all the other places where that variable is used. Really useful tool. Get used to using stuff like that. Don't just rename stuff and then have your program crash a few times. So in this we're going to print out, so we're going to do age times 2. If I run it like this, and if I run this, it says enter your age, and I enter, let's say 15, prints out 30, and then it gets an error. Why? Because it doesn't have the length of a number. There's no way to get the length of a number. Right? We don't have a definition for what the length of a number is, whereas we know what the definition of a length of a string is, right? When I say give me the length of the string, the length is just going to be the number of letters in the string. So if I go that, and it just says 3 because the string age has the length of 3. So those are some built-in functions. And understand that what they're doing is they're letting us access all this fancy code that's been written by someone else. There's a lot of other built-in features. There's features we can import when we start talking about libraries and things like that. We'll be dealing with importing other people's code and accessing functions that they've built. But this is how you use a function. The next we're going to talk about is creating our own functions.